I was dozing in my leather chair, the kind that has learned the shape of my knees and back, when the landline rang hard enough to startle the mug on the side table. The news had just finished its bit about heating costs and another nor'easter rolling in by Christmas. I should have let the call go to the machine, but when you live alone long enough, late-night calls have a way of sounding like emergencies. The caller ID glowed, Gavin. My son doesn't call at 10 p.m. on a weeknight unless something's broken that he can't fix himself. I answered. Dad, his voice cracked like it did when he was 15 and reversed my old pickup into a mailbox. I need your help. I straightened in the chair, bones creaking louder than the furnace. What happened? Silence stretched across the line. I could hear him pacing, the quick scrape of a chair, his breath catching like he was fighting with himself. Finally, he whispered it, 50. 50 what? 50,000. I lost it. His voice dropped, guilty and small. Crypto. It looked safe, 30% return in 6 months. I used our emergency fund. The kids' college accounts. Took out a home equity loan for the rest. My fingers tightened around the receiver. You put the house on the table? Just 25. Manageable. If we move fast. He inhaled. Dad, your place is worth 300, easy. You're alone in a 4-bedroom. Sell. Downsize to a condo, meals, shuttle bus, community events. You'd still have a pile left. We can fix this. I stared at the mantel clock ticking like a second heart. I'm not selling my house. His tone shifted into that slow, patient voice children use when they think their parents have gone soft. It's practical. No, I said. It's home. My wife's rose bed lay asleep under burlap in the backyard. The doorway still bore pencil notches marking Ellie's height last summer. Practicality doesn't measure that. If you won't really help, Gavin snapped, I don't know what we're supposed to do. There are lawyers. Credit counselors. People who know how to handle this. He hung up without a goodbye. The dial tone buzzed in my ear like a fly trapped in glass. I shuffled into the kitchen and peeled open the gas bill sitting on the counter. Red stripe. Past due. It wasn't catastrophic, not compared to 50,000, but it was the kind of number that could freeze a house if ignored. I paid what I could online, then adjusted the thermostat down to 66. The blower kicked in, coughing out thin warm air. I pressed my hand against the vent and thought, this is how old men lose their homes, not in crashes, but in drifts. 10 minutes later, my neighbor Hank called. He's been my anchor since back when we both wore factory badges with Midwest Motors stamped above our names. What's going on? You sound rough. Gavin called, I said. Those 2 words carried the rest. How bad? 50. Home equity. Wants me to sell. Absolutely not. His voice sharpened. Don't you dare. That house holds your life. He didn't have to list the reasons. The baseboard scrape from Noah's toy tractor. The sunbeam that hit the front room at 9:32 every morning. My wife's spice jars, labels in her blocky handwriting. I told him no, I said. Saying it aloud steadied me. But he'll ask again. Sleep on it. Call me in the morning. And Earl, lock your doors. People do desperate things when money's on fire. 4 days later, Gavin called back. His voice was polished, like a salesman practicing for a new pitch. Dad, come for Christmas dinner. No money talk. Just family. The kids have been asking for you non-stop. They made you presents. Maya wants to cook. I looked across the room at the red sweater my wife knit the last Christmas she could still hold 2 needles. I lifted it off the hanger and laid it across the bed. All right, I said. But I'm coming smart. That night, Hank and I sat at his kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee and worked out a code phrase, something I'd never say by accident. He'd call me at 4:45 p.m. during dinner. If I answered with the phrase, he'd ring the sheriff. If I didn't answer, he'd do the same. Back home, I wrapped Ellie's science kit and Noah's model airplane in paper that bled joy through its edges. I baked my wife's apple pie from her old index card, tracing her handwriting with my thumb, cold butter, don't overwork, breathe. And I practiced the phrase. Out loud. Until it sat on my tongue like a life jacket I hoped never to use. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. It helps more folks my age spot traps like these before they spring. On Christmas Eve, I tucked the sheriff's number behind my driver's license, charged my phone to 100, and placed the pie on the back seat like a newborn wrapped in a towel. At the door, I paused. The house held its heat like a loyal dog. I'm not selling you, I told the walls. Then I locked the door, touched each pocket, keys, wallet, phone, and drove to Maple Grove with gifts, pie, and a plan-riding shotgun. If I stumbled tonight, it wouldn't be because I forgot who I am. It would be because someone else tried to take the wheel. Maya opened the door with a smile set a notch too bright, a dish towel riding her shoulder like a badge of normal. The house smelled like pot roast and cloves. Gavin stood behind her in his corduroy, responsible, jacket, the one that makes him look like a magazine ad for barn tables and second chances. Noah barreled into my knees, mitten damp and toothpaste sweet. Ellie hovered, guarding a small, lumpy box with both hands the way a bomb tech holds a miracle. Smells like old times, Gavin said, taking the pie from me. Old times smelled like paid bills, I said, shrugging out of my coat. Where do you want the gifts? Under the tree, he said, already moving to the kitchen. I followed, because mantles lie and kitchens don't. The ceramic rooster timer watched from its perch, same as last year. Same chipped mixing bowl. Same fridge magnet that says coffee because childhood doesn't last forever. The differences were the kind of things a house tells you only if you listen: a new padlock on the basement door, backdoor chain thrown even though family was expected, and a skinny absence in the knife block where the paring knife should have stood like a little soldier. Wash up? Maya said, gesturing to the sink. I turned the hot tap. It came on slow, like the water had second thoughts about being helpful. Beside the sink sat a small glass jar, label peeled clean. I tipped it. Bitter climbed into the steam and sat on my tongue uninvited. Maya's hand rested on my elbow. You okay? Fine, I said, then smiled to sand the edge off the word. My hands were steady because I was watching them. Gavin set 2 glasses by a new open bottle of whiskey, seal torn and tossed, the teeth of the strip ragged. Beside them, a pot of mulled cider exhaled clove and orange peel like a promise. He poured a mug and slid it across. Maya's recipe. Apples and spices. I lifted it, let the steam fog my glasses, and took a careful sip. Cinnamon and clove, and under it, an echo that didn't belong in a kitchen. Not nutmeg. Not star anise. A whisper of hospital corridor. I set the mug down. Too sweet? Maya asked. Could be, I said, and reached for the faucet again. Let me get a glass of water. I opened the cabinet above the sink. Behind a stack of tumblers, a small plastic dropper bottle crouched like a secret. No label. Cap cinched too tight, the plastic whitened where somebody had over-torqued it. My eyes caught it, Maya's hand moved. Swift. Practiced. The bottle vanished into her apron pocket with the grace of a card trick she hated knowing. Food's ready, she said, too bright by a full watt. We sat. The pot roast had been given time and mercy, carrots went sweet the way they do when they've told their stories to broth for hours. The kids narrated their worlds. Ellie's science kit had goggles that made everything feel like an experiment. Noah's model airplane was as big as a bus, which is bus-sized in the mathematics of 5-year-olds. I asked questions and kept my fork moving. My phone in my pocket hummed once at 4:44, a private bell only I could hear. Brace yourself, the plan is about to call. Want a top off? Gavin asked, already tilting the ladle toward my mug. I'm good, I said, sliding my hand over the rim. The ladle hesitated, then swung to his own cup. He took a drink, made a show of it. Men who overact don't realize the audience they're playing to has already read the script. We sang after dinner, Maya's idea. It was bad enough to be perfect. Noah yelled every third word. Ellie harmonized with herself like a chorus of one. For a minute I let it be a casserole house again. Then the room tipped a degree, as if the overhead light had chosen one corner to love more than the others. I stood, chair legs whispering on the floor. Bathroom, I said. Wash the gravy off. In the kitchen, the bald dish towel by the sink had a job it wasn't designed for. I lifted it. The missing paring knife lay beneath, handle nicked where I'd dropped it last summer. The blade smelled faintly of something that wouldn't clean a counter so much as it would erase a person for a few hours. I wet the towel and wiped my palms slowly. Counting kept my hands honest. 1, 2, 3. Hank's call came at 4:45. How's the roast? He asked, voice casual, weight ready. I left the red sweater in the freezer, I said, the ridiculous sentence sounding exactly like the thing it was, a life preserver disguised as a joke. 1 heartbeat. Got it. A soft click, the sound of a man moving from one call to another, fingers already over 9. I ended the call, slid the phone back into my pocket, and opened the cabinet beneath the sink. Cleaning spray. A roll of trash bags. A family of plastic shopping sacks folded into the triangles my wife used to make when the world still obeyed. Behind them, wedged against the backboard, 2 more dropper bottles. Caps on crooked, the liquid inside the color of weak tea. Footsteps. I shut the cabinet with my knee and turned the faucet on, letting the water hide the small clack. Gavin leaned against the doorframe, hands casual in his pockets, posture that said nothing to see here. You good? He asked again. Old men wash their hands a lot, I said, drying with the same towel that had been doing unofficial work. I set it down, folded now, as if that erased what it had held. Pie in the oven smells incredible, he said. He tapped the rooster timer with 2 fingers like it was a pet he'd trained. 5 minutes. From the dining room, presents? Noah asked, timing his life by sugar and excitement. Ellie held her wrapped box with careful seriousness. Presents, Maya said, standing, smoothing her apron with hands that shook the smallest amount a human hand can shake and still be called steady. We filed back to the table. The room had the held breath quiet of places about to learn something. My phone was a warm coin against my hip. Outside, the street kept its ordinary face, but even through the drapes I could sense the air changing shape, like weather getting its story straight. The knock came, 2, pause, 2, knuckles that know their work. No one moved right away. Even the steam rising off the roast hesitated, waiting to see what story we were going to live now. I stood. Not fast. Not slow. Just a man choosing to own his next 5 minutes. The knock hit the door in a rhythm only people with badges use, 2, pause, 2. The air changed. Even the steam lifting off the roast seemed to freeze mid-spiral. County Sheriff's Office, a voice called. Maya's hand shot to Ellie's shoulder. Gavin's jaw clenched so hard I thought he'd break a molar. I stood, my mug left on the table, and walked to the door with the weight of a man who knows his next steps matter. I opened it. 2 deputies stood framed in the cold, boots wet, coats salted, flashlights tucked but ready. Their eyes scanned the room faster than mouths could form questions. We got a call from a concerned neighbor, the taller one said. Any medical issues tonight? Yes, I said, loud enough for my own ears to trust me. I believe I was given something I didn't consent to. There are dropper bottles under the sink, a jar by the whiskey, and a knife under a towel. I had one sip of cider and felt wrong. The deputy's stance shifted by a half-inch, the small pivot from social visit to official duty. Kitchen, he told his partner. They moved like men who knew rooms could lie. Deputy Blair snapped on gloves and opened the cabinet under the sink. He found the bottles. The towel revealed the knife. He lifted the jar with a steady hand and bagged it. The air in the kitchen thickened as the smell of cloves surrendered to the sharper tang of chemicals. Paramedics rolled in next, pulse oximeter on my finger, cuff biting into my arm, cold EKG stickers on my chest. Pressures soft, one said. Pupils sluggish. We recommend transport. I caught Gavin's phone lighting up on the counter. Nate, door in 5. He flipped it face down, too late. Expecting company? Blair asked. Just a friend dropping something, Gavin said. Let's keep the door closed to friends tonight, Blair answered, calm but final. He held out a hand. Phones on the table, please. Maya placed hers first, relief disguised as compliance. The kids followed, serious as judges. Gavin hesitated, thumb hovering a beat too long over the screen. Every cop in America knows that dance. He slid it across. Another text flashed on the lock screen before it went dark, we're here. You stall. Through the frosted window, I saw it, a dark sedan idling across the street. Too new for our block, exhaust rising in heavy white pools. A knock at the door. Not the sheriff's knock this time. Smooth, businesslike. Blair cracked it open. A man in a sharp coat, hair slick, cologne too proud. Sorry, wrong house, he said. Wrong night, Blair answered, shutting the door and bolting it. The deadbolt turned with the kind of sound that makes people pick sides. I spoke clearly, listing what I'd seen and smelled, the bitter under the cider, the missing knife, the bottles, the texts. No guesses, just facts. Blair's partner took notes like chiseling stone. Medical 2 minutes out, the radio squawked. Ellie whispered, Grandpa, is this bad? It's grown-up business, I said. And the sheriff's job is to make it safe. Blair crouched, showing his badge number. Remember this number, Ellie. If you feel scared, tell an adult and say this number. It's like a spell. She nodded, tucking it behind her ear like treasure. When paramedics asked if I'd ride to the hospital, I said, not until the kids are safe with someone I trust. Name? Blair asked. Hank Morales. 3 doors down. Copy, he said into his radio. Minutes later, Hank knocked his knock, steady, known. He stepped inside, and the kids ran to him like gravity was in his chest. He bundled them in coats, Ellie's gift still clutched tight. We'll keep the pie warm, he said softly. The sedan across the street pulled away, embarrassed to be caught watching. You can't just take my kids. Gavin snapped, voice cracking like old wood. We can keep them safe, Blair said. That's our job. Maya finally spoke with steel in her throat. Please, take them to Hank's. They don't need to see any more of this. Gavin's pacing carved grooves into the rug. This is insane. Over 1 sip of cider? No, I said, looking at him square. Over a plan that smelled like pharmacy and looked like paperwork. The rooster timer dinged, sharp and foolish, like it had been waiting for its cue in a play that no longer needed it. The deputies loaded the evidence. The paramedics wheeled me out, monitors beeping steady. As the gurney rolled, I glanced back once more. On the table, Ellie's clay mug sat untouched, Grandpa painted in blue letters leaning sideways. Don't lose that, I told Blair. We won't, he said. The door closed behind me. Outside, the winter air cut sharp and honest. And for the first time that night, I felt something clean, the sound of my own choice, louder than my son's silence. The ambulance doors shut with a heavy click, and for the first time that night, I was the passenger instead of the driver of my own story. The kind-eyed medic fastened the straps gently, like he'd done it for his own father before. He tucked a blanket around me, his hands efficient but not rushed. "You did the right thing," he said, adjusting the oxygen line near my nose. "Feels like tearing a bandage off skin that still needs it," I muttered. "But better than letting the wound seal over poison." He gave a small nod. No judgment, no pity, just the kind of silence that lets a man keep his dignity while admitting he's scared. At the hospital, they worked fast: blood draw, urine cup, breath sample. A nurse scribbled sedative screen on the lab slip in block letters, her face making that careful professional frown that means not a crisis, but not nothing either. She hooked me up to fluids and said, "We'll keep you overnight." I stared at the ceiling tiles, tracing their holes like constellations. Some people count sheep. I count patterns until the noise in my head runs out of things to argue with. At 3 a.m., the lab tech came back. "We found it," she said simply. Z-drug. Not a normal dose either. I didn't need to ask what that meant. My body had already told me. Around dawn, my phone buzzed with a text from Hank, a photo of Ellie and Noah asleep on his couch under his gooseprint throw. On the table in front of them sat the clay mug Ellie had made me. It was already full of crayons, like a vase for color instead of flowers. I enlarged the photo and stared at it until my eyes burned. That little mug, blue letters leaning sideways, was my proof that the world still held something unbroken. Another buzz. A number I didn't recognize. "We can still talk if you're reasonable." No name. No hello. Just entitlement, dressed in words. I flipped the phone face down on the tray table, heart hammering like I'd just sprinted. Some men apologize. Others negotiate. Gavin had chosen command. I saved the message, screenshotted it, and sent it to Hank for safekeeping. A paper trail begins with one piece of paper, or one text. By lunchtime, the attending physician signed my discharge. Before I could even leave, the county clerk called, "Emergency family court hearing at 2 p.m. protective orders and custody review." I put on the only suit grief had left me thin enough to still fit. Hank drove. He kept his hand braced on the wheel the way you do when you're keeping both a car and a friend steady. The courthouse smelled of paper, lemon cleaner, and nerves. We waited outside hearing room 3. Inside, the judge was small and sharp, silver hair pinned neat, eyes that didn't waste time. Deputy Blair testified first. He described the knock cadence, my statement, the bottles under the sink, the knife, the jar, the text door in 5, and the sedan that left when it saw lights. He described Gavin's hesitation handing over his phone, and Maya's attempt to pocket the dropper bottle. The facts lined up like nails in a row. The paramedic followed, blood pressure soft, pupils sluggish, transport advised. Preliminary tox screen positive for Z-class sedative. He read it like a measurement, not a judgment. Maya's voice shook when she stood. "I didn't put anything in his drink," she said, clutching a tissue. "But I should have stopped what was going to happen. Gavin told me those bottles were bitters, for cider, for cough syrup. He asked me to peel the labels off because they were sticky. Last night, when he asked me to hand him one, I realized it wasn't cough syrup. He said it would help his dad relax." She broke on that last word, and no one in the room doubted her anymore. The guardian ad litem spoke next. "The children are safe. They are oriented, eating, asking normal questions." Ellie described the cider as spicy and like soap. "I recommend temporary custody with Maya under a safety plan, supervised visitation for Gavin, and protective orders for the grandfather, given coercion concerns." Then my attorney, Caswell, sharp tie, steady hands, stood. "Your Honor, we have supplemental evidence." He slid a printed email across. It was a statement from a mobile notary. Gavin had booked her the previous evening for a quitclaim deed transfer, my house to him. She wrote that when she asked about the signatory, Gavin described me as elderly, likely to be emotional, and told her, "We'll keep the lights low so he doesn't get agitated." The notary refused the appointment and flagged it. The judge's eyebrow climbed slow and deliberate. You could feel the courtroom stiffen as if the frame had finally found its studs. When it was my turn, I stood. My knees complained, but my voice did not. "Your Honor, I love my son. And I will not sell my house." Those two sentences stand next to each other, because both are true. I ask for a no-contact order, and a stay away from my property. Not as punishment, but as scaffolding, so he can rebuild without leaning on me. The gavel tapped once. Orders granted. Temporary custody with Maya, supervised visitation for Gavin, no contact for me, and random wellness checks at their home. Walking out, I felt both hollowed and held upright. Not triumphant. Not safe. But not alone. The system had placed its hand lightly on my back, nudging me towards something that looked like justice. And justice, I realized, doesn't feel like victory. It feels like air you can finally breathe without tasting someone else's plan. I left the courthouse with a thin paper in my pocket that felt heavier than a brick. A no-contact order, a stay away from my property, and supervised visitation for Gavin. It wasn't punishment, the judge had said, but scaffolding. I repeated that word to myself all the way home, like if I said it enough it would hold up the part of me that still wanted to fall apart. That afternoon, I sat across from an elder law attorney named Caswell. His office smelled of paper and good coffee. He had kind eyes but a jaw that looked like it had argued with steel and won. "We need to move fast," he said, pulling a legal pad across the desk. 4 things, minimum. First, we revoked every power of attorney I'd ever signed, medical and financial. He filed notices with my doctor and my bank. Second, we froze my credit with all 3 bureaus, slapped fraud alerts on my accounts, and set verbal passwords only I knew. Jackie Robinson and nutmeg, 2 words Gavin wouldn't think to say, but words that lived in my bones. Third, we filed a police complaint for attempted poisoning and attempted deed fraud. Caswell stapled to it the deputies' photos, the talk screen, and the notary's letter. Fourth, he began drafting a civil complaint for elder abuse, emotional distress, conspiracy, and attempted theft. He read each word out loud like he was laying bricks around me. By the time he finished, I felt less like prey and more like a man with walls again. That night, I sat in the doorway between my kitchen and the hall, the place where all first steps and last words had happened in this house. I whispered to the walls, "You're not for sale." The furnace kicked on, a low steady whoosh like an answer. 2 days later, a bank officer called. Someone had tried to open a reverse mortgage inquiry in my name. The officer asked my new passcode. "Who stole home in 55? "Jackie Robinson," I said, and I swear I could hear the smile in her voice as she said, "That'll do it, Mr. Martin." The attempt was logged and stopped cold. Another nail in Gavin's coffin, hammered by his own desperation. That evening, Maya texted me a picture of the kids coloring at her sister's kitchen table. Ellie had written Grandpa in her mug with a blue marker, underlining it twice. She sent one more line, "They're safe. They miss you." I stared at those words longer than I should have, because even in the mess, her loyalty had shifted. Quietly, but enough. Then Gavin texted me from an unknown number, "You made this nuclear. We could have handled it as a family." I didn't respond. I saved it, screenshotted it, and sent it to Caswell. Within an hour, Caswell had replied to him, "All communication goes through counsel." 10 minutes later, my porch camera pinged. A man in an expensive coat walked up, stared into the doorbell like it owed him money, and left an envelope. Inside was a handwritten settlement agreement. Gavin's handwriting, messy and rushed. It said if I transferred my house to him, he'd guarantee me a monthly stipend and handle my needs in old age. No notary. No witness. Just arrogance pressed into lined paper. I bagged it like evidence, photographed it, and drove it straight to Caswell's office. He looked at it, smirked, and said, "Gift-wrapped exhibit." That night, I pulled out a manila folder from my lockbox. Inside were my wife's life insurance papers, my deed, my insurance, and a letter I'd written for the kids a year ago after she died. I read it again. Love does not mean signing everything over. If Grandpa falls, call 911, then call Hank. The house is never collateral. The house is memory, and memory doesn't belong in a bank. I placed Ellie's mug on top of the folder. For once, I slept through the night. If you want justice with teeth, you need receipts. That's what Caswell told me, and that's what I started building. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a stack of envelopes, and I went through every bank statement from the past 3 months. I highlighted the bills in yellow, the new charges in red. 2 cash withdrawals stood out like blood stains, $1,200, then $900, both from an old joint Christmas fund account I'd forgotten Gavin still had access to. Memo lines blank. I closed the account the next morning, printed the ledger, and handed it to Caswell. He smiled the way a craftsman does when you bring him good wood. Next, I called my phone carrier and requested my call detail records. On the night of Christmas dinner, there were 3 blocked calls between 3:50 and 4:20 p.m. originated from a VoIP service. Gavin's phone had rung in that window. Coincidence doesn't usually line up that neatly. Caswell's investigator subpoenaed the logs. He said in civil discovery, "You don't need luck, just persistence." We dug deeper. At the county recorder's office, we pulled Gavin's home equity loan documents. The numbers made me sick. 19.74% interest, signed with a company that had a smiling website and nothing else but a P.O. box. He was already in technical default. The loan was a time bomb with no wire cutters. I made a spreadsheet, every due date, every late fee, every missed payment. When Caswell saw it, he tapped the paper with his pen and said, "This is how we tell the judge what time the rain started." A detective from the sheriff's office called 2 days later. The dropper bottles from the kitchen tested positive for a Z drug. The cider residue matched it in low concentration. Fingerprints on the caps weren't mine. They were Gavin's and another set, unknown. The sedan outside hadn't been a ghost. They traced it to a man named Nathaniel Nate Colburn, listed as an independent, mobile concierge, who advertised investment solutions and flexible notary services. His name came up in 2 civil suits for contract interference. The detective said they'd be sending the case to the county attorney by the end of the week. Meanwhile, Gavin tried to flip the script. He filed a petition to modify custody, painting me as volatile and confused. His lawyer attached an unsigned affidavit from some so-called friend who claimed I'd threatened to call immigration on Maya's sister if I wasn't invited to family holidays. A lie that collapsed on its own weight. Caswell filed a motion for sanctions, attaching the EMS notes, the talk screen, deputy photographs, and the notary's letter. He built a timeline clean enough for a schoolteacher to grade, numbered events, page citations, proof stacked like bricks. I felt every one of my 68 years and none of them. At night, the house hummed its winter song. I sat by the vent, listening. Grief and anger fought over the same chair in my chest, so I put out another chair and told them to share. It was the only way I could sleep. 2 mornings later, the county attorney herself called. She said they were filing charges, attempted poisoning of an elder and attempted theft by deception. She warned me it wouldn't move fast. Justice crawls, she said. But it gets where it's going. I thanked her. When I hung up, I realized my hands had stopped shaking. That weekend, I made pancakes at Hank's with Ellie and Noah. I shaped one like Idaho, another like New Jersey. Ellie giggled and said, "Make the United States, Grandpa." Noah drizzled syrup until the dog licked the floor. For a few minutes, the world was exactly the way it should have been, kids sticky with sugar, laughter bouncing off the walls, the kind of morning no court order could take away. Later that day, Maya handed me a Ziploc bag. Inside was a page torn from a spiral notebook, found wadded under the sink. 2 lines of numbers, a name I didn't know, and scrawled at the bottom, "Dad's house sale?" She had circled it in blue pen. She looked at me with red eyes and whispered, "I should have stopped this sooner." "You said it when it counted," I told her. She nodded, like a woman who'd finally decided which side of the line she wanted to stand on. That night, back in my own kitchen, I put Ellie's mug next to my wife's old recipe card and stared at both until the house seemed to breathe with me. This wasn't over. Not yet. But the walls were holding, and so was I. The courtroom for Gavin's probable cause hearing smelled of old carpet and bad coffee. He walked in wearing that corduroy jacket he always saved for job interviews and apologies. It didn't fit anymore, not the way he carried himself. He looked smaller inside it, like a man trying to hide behind the memory of being respectable. He stood straight, hands clasped, but his eyes never settled on mine. When the judge asked for his plea, he said, "Not guilty," as if the words could build him a bridge over the truth. The prosecutor laid out the case without theatrics, the bottles, the talk screen, the text message that said, "Door in 5, the cancelled notary appointment." Each piece of evidence landed like a hammer. The judge read the no-contact order again, slow and clear, like she wanted everyone in the room to hear the weight of it. Gavin's lawyer tried to paint it as a misunderstanding. Then he shifted to my age, hinting at confusion, hinting at memory gaps. Caswell slid a neurocognitive screen across the table, signed by my doctor, clear as glass. Then he raised the device forensics report. Gavin's Google searches lit up the courtroom: how to calm someone for signing, how much zolpidem to relax elderly. It was like watching a balloon pop in slow motion. The air left Gavin's defense before he even sat down. After court, I crossed the street to Caswell's office. He had the civil complaint ready, thick with exhibits. "This may feel like revenge," he said. "It isn't. It's consequence. But consequence can feel sharp when you're used to walking barefoot." I nodded. Revenge wasn't the point. But justice, with edges, was. Maya met me on the courthouse steps. Her makeup was gone, her eyes bare. "I should have said no harder, earlier," she said. "We all wish we had tomorrow's spine today," I told her. "But you said it when it counted." She nodded and pulled a zip bag from her purse. Inside was a notebook page she'd found under the sink. Numbers, a name, and then scrawled at the bottom, "Dad's house sale?" She'd circled it in blue. More proof. Another nail in a frame already groaning. Caswell's investigator served papers to Nate at a co-working space. The man laughed, told the process server to leave it at reception. Hours later, my prepaid phone buzzed. His voice was smooth, slick with arrogance. "We can make this go away if you're flexible." I held the phone steady. "I've been flexible for 42 years, I said. "Now I'm steel." He chuckled like he'd won, then hung up when the silence showed him otherwise. That night, I went home and the house greeted me the way only an old house can, with dust warmed by the furnace, a smell that was both ordinary and holy. I set Ellie's mug on the counter and slid my wife's recipe card back into its clip. Then I pulled out the manila folder from the lockbox. Inside were the deeds, the insurance policies, the letters I'd written after she died. I added a new page, typed and printed. Bullet points, neat and clear: if Grandpa falls, call 911. Hank has the spare key. The house is never collateral. Love does not require signing anything. I sealed it in plastic. Not for me. For them. For the first time in weeks, I slept hard. The kind of sleep that doesn't ask questions, the kind you only get when you've finally stopped cushioning someone else's fall. When I woke, sunlight cut across the floor. I made coffee, black and steady, and thought about scaffolding. The judge had called it that, but it felt like something stronger. Not scaffolding. Foundation. Gavin had tried to dig at it with greed and desperation. But it was holding. I was holding. The case wasn't finished. Trials and hearings don't end in a day. But that morning, in the quiet of my kitchen, I realized something. Justice isn't a sudden flood. It's a faucet turned back on, drip by drip, until the pipes hum again. And my house, my life, was humming. The criminal case crawled the way all cases do, but it moved. Forensics pinned the texts to Gavin and his associate Nate. The bottles tested positive again, fingerprints on the caps that weren't mine. The notary testified, clear and professional, saying she'd refused because the setup reeked of fraud. A bank officer explained the reverse mortgage inquiry and how it was killed by a single passcode, Jackie Robinson. The jury didn't need me to cry. They needed me to be clear, steady, boring. I told the story as I'd lived it, the bitter cider, the missing knife, the towel, the phrase to Hank, the knock at the door. The truth doesn't need ornaments. Before the verdict, the county prosecutor offered a plea: attempted poisoning of an elder, attempted theft by deception, probation with jail time suspended, drug counseling, restitution, and a no-contact order for 5 years. She asked me quietly in the hallway if this would feel like justice. I asked her one question back: will this teach him, or only spare him? She answered, it keeps your grandchildren fed and sleeping, and it keeps you off the stand twice. That was enough for me. I said yes. In civil court, the battle looked different. Caswell pushed until the other side folded. We settled, but not softly. A lien against Gavin's future earnings, garnishment triggers, attorney's fees, and a consent judgment already filed with the clerk. If he skipped a payment, it meant contempt of court and a weekend in county. The numbers aren't important for a story like this, but the shape is: he tried to take everything, and ended up carrying a burden instead. Maya filed for legal separation. She said it wasn't vengeance, just protection. The children stayed with her, supervised visits for Gavin. I saw him twice at the family center. He came in quiet, shoulders bent, looking at the floor more than at me. Ellie drew pictures while we sat there. One was of my house smiling, with a little square in the yard and a scribble on top. What's that? I asked. Sand, she said. For when it's slippery. Hank laughed when I told him later. He called me seatbelt again, the nickname he gave me 40 years ago when I'd lectured him into buckling up during a road trip. Some names stick because they're true. I mow my yard in straight lines again. I replaced the chain on the back door with a stronger one, not because I'm scared but because I'm done pretending locks are impolite. I keep the no-contact order in a plastic sleeve in the drawer with the batteries and the screwdriver, the drawer every old house has where tools that keep the world together are stored. People ask if I regret calling 911 on my own son. I don't. What I regret are the years I let silence sit at my table when questions should have. What I regret are the times I gave him money with no receipt, help with no boundary, love with no spine. Love doesn't mean letting yourself be erased. You can love someone and still tell the truth about them. That's the lesson this house taught me, and I'll keep saying it until I don't have breath left. If you're my age, listening to this, and your child is asking you to sign papers you don't understand, I want you to hear me: you can love them without giving them your foundation. Call a neighbor. Set a code phrase. Bake the pie if you must, but keep the sheriff's number behind your license. Protect your home, because a house isn't just walls. It's memory. It's history. It's you. Last Saturday, Ellie and Noah came over. We made pancakes, shapes of states. Ellie asked for the United Kingdom. I did my best, Scotland lumpy, Wales too small, but she grinned and said it was perfect. Noah spilled syrup, the dog licked it up, and the room rang with laughter. When they put on their coats to leave, Ellie pointed at the mug on my counter, the one she made with the blue letters leaning sideways. Don't let anyone take that, she said. I won't, I told her. After they left, I dried my hands on a clean towel, checked the new chain on the back door, and stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall. The furnace kicked on, warm air rising, the house humming like it was alive. I whispered the words that had carried me since Christmas, I am not for sale. And for the first time in months, the words felt less like defense and more like victory.